Premier David Eby issued a terse statement Sunday afternoon announcing that NDP MLA Adam Walker had been kicked out of caucus after an internal investigation found evidence of misconduct. A human resources complaint against Walker triggered the investigation. This is Harold Munro, editor-in-chief of the Vancouver Sun, and joining me is Katie DeRosa, our legislative bureau chief from the Legislative Gallery in Victoria. Good morning, Katie.
Morning, Harold. Yeah, we've got a updated gallery, a little bit more cubicles, but yeah, a bit more functional now.
And we're recording this probably less than 24 hours after Eby issued his statement on Walker. So what do you know? Is there anything more about the situation that you can tell us? Because it was a very brief statement.
Well, the premier had a press conference in Richmond that was supposed to be about housing, but it was really dominated with questions of what's the details, give us more information. You know, in a vacuum of information, people are just going to fill in their own gaps. So the premier kind of played a process of elimination where he said it's not sexual harassment, it's not criminal in nature, it's not related to a kind of bizarre incident last week where Adam Walker fended off a deer that was attacking his dog. So we know it's not related to that, but well, okay, that leaves other questions of what is it related to? So the premier confirmed there was one complaint by an employee in July that sparked an internal human resources investigation. And the premier called those, said that brought up serious and concerning issues that left him no choice but to remove Walker from NDP caucus. So I think we need to do some more investigation on what exactly those allegations were. Walker has not made any significant public statements yet, but he may be putting out a statement later today. I think the premier it sounded like there was some perhaps legal HR reasons for not releasing more details, but certainly his constituents of Parksville-Qualicum will be wondering, well, what's happened to our elected representatives? So I definitely think the public has more questions that need to be answered.
Right. And so where does this leave Eby? Will it have much of an effect? Or what do you see happening next then?
I mean, it depends. I mean, if Walker came out and tried to maybe, I don't know, spill some dirt, or if he's bitter about the process, in terms of the seat in the next election, it is kind of a close seat. It was long since 1996 held by Michelle Stilwell of the BC Liberals, now called the BC United, and then Adam Walker won in 2020 by only 2,000 seats. 2,000 votes. So it's a close riding. So who knows what's going to happen? It's definitely going to be one to watch if he's removed from the NDP. He's now sitting as an independent, leaves the NDP with 56 seats, so obviously still a comfortable majority, but provides perhaps some a dissenter who was previously in the NDP caucus who now might be, I don't know, maybe he's going to spill some tea. We'll have to see.
Well, speaking of dissenters, that was the big news in politics last week, BC politics, with Bruce Banman leaving BC United and Kevin Falcon for the BC Conservative Party, giving them official party status. That's a big deal. Going from a party of one, John Rudstead, to a party of two. This is the MLA for Abbotsford South. What does this mean? Should Kevin Falcon be concerned about other defections? What are you hearing?
This was asked to him, Kevin Falcon, last week, and he said, of course I'm concerned. We've just rebranded our party. The party is now called BC United, and it doesn't have as much brand recognition as the BC Liberals had. Rustad was kicked out of caucus last year because of his climate skeptic views and retweeting some, climate skeptics on Twitter. And that may have been a fatal mistake for Kevin Falcon, because now John Rustad has pulled Bruce Banman to the BC Conservatives, and could there be other more right-leaning BC United MLAs who are tinkering with the idea of moving over? The official party status will give the BC Conservatives more legislative resources, and there's actually a meeting of the Legislative Assembly Management Committee, for a fancy name for basically the committee that determines all the finances. They'll be meeting on the 21st to decide if the BC Conservatives get the same resources as the BC Greens, because there's no precedent in recent history for a fourth party. So the BC Greens are considered the third party, but there's a question of if they have equal seats, then why is the BC Conservatives, why would they be considered the fourth party? Would those two parties not have equal status in terms of the resources they get? So as it stands right now, there's no funding model for a fourth party. So that's what the Legislative Assembly Management Committee will be deciding. And that's Rustad has said he's going to push for equal resources for the BC Conservatives.
Oh, interesting. When Banman told you last week that he wanted to raise local issues and vote his conscience, and he found it difficult to do that as a member of BC United because it was either politically inconvenient or sometimes not, quote, politically correct. Do you know what issues he's talking about?
He mentioned, I asked him about that, and he mentioned that, his grandparents are Mennonites. He is from a religious background, as are some of his constituents, many of his constituents. And so he felt like some of the, religious issues were being stifled. He didn't specifically mention what those are, but one can imagine abortion is an issue, sometimes religious conscientious objection to vaccines or other medications. So there's a lot of more socially conservative issues that we often associate to, say, the Republicans in the United States, where religion dominates a lot of issues. Also, gender identity, trans rights in schools. There was a conservative candidate, BC conservative candidate in the by-election for Vancouver Mount Pleasant, who was raising a lot of the parents' rights issues around acknowledging trans youth in schools. That candidate was saying that there should not be any, you shouldn't allow a trans athlete to play on a team of the opposite sex from what the sex they were, their sex at birth. And so that was obviously a very niche issue, but that seems to have really taken over some of these socially conservative views. So again, Banman didn't say that specifically, but those are some of the more religious connected issues that maybe he's wants to raise. So, I would like to talk to Bruce and John a bit further about, okay, what are the issues that are going to set you apart from BC United? But certainly I think Falcon is noticing this, some of these, like you said, defectors. And interestingly, Abbotsford South has quite a history of elected BC Liberals who have moved to different parties. That includes Daryl Pleckus, who defected to the BC NDP to become Speaker, and also John Van Doggen, who left the BC Liberals to lead the BC Conservative Party. So it's a little bit of history repeating itself.
Oh, that's interesting. Huh. Premier Eby was in the news as well last week, saying he was white hot angry after a man was released on an unescorted day pass from the Forensic Psychiatric Institute in Coquitlam, and allegedly stabbed 3 people at a Chinatown festival. Eby has since, I guess, appointed the former Abbotsford Police Chief, Bob Rich, to look into the circumstances around the issuance of the unescorted pass. What are the parameters of what Bob Rich can look into?
So, there have been advocates who have dealt with the BC Review Board who were frustrated about the lack of transparency, lack of accountability. They were pushing Eby to announce a broader review into the entire system. And basically, the system is that there's when someone is deemed not criminally responsible by reason of mental disorder, there's a BC Review Board that determines whether the individual can be released from the psychiatric facility in which they're held. And the BC Review Board is somewhat like the parole board, but we have found it very difficult to get the decision that they made around Donnelly to speak to anyone from the review board. And so that's why advocates that I spoke to last week were saying, we want the Premier to order a complete review of the entire system. And the Premier did not do that. Bob Rich will look into this specific case, why Donnelly was released despite the panel finding that he posed a significant threat and that he does best under close supervision. So why was he released despite those findings? And also the investigation will look into whether there are other potentially dangerous people who are held in forensic facilities who had committed crimes but were deemed not criminally responsible, who are also being considered or out on day passes. So who else is in this similar situation who could potentially be a threat? But again, it will not look at the broader system of the BC Review Board, how it releases its decisions and how it comes to its decisions to recommend someone be held in custody, and then how it is that even though they recommend that someone is a significant threat, that person is still released on a day pass.
Right. And is there a timeline for when Rich has to report back?
I asked that to the Premier, and he didn't give a specific timeline. He said he wants to see it as soon as possible. So we'll have to see how quickly that investigation is done and what kind of cooperation Bob Rich gets. The BC Review Board statement, the public sector, the PHSA last week, the Health Services Association that oversees the psychiatric hospital, they said, well, we will be cooperating with the investigation. But, again, we will have to see what kind of response we get from the review board on that.
Right. All right, Katie. Well, thanks. That time flew by. Thanks for your time this week, and we'll catch up again next week.
Thanks, Harold. Pleasure to talk to you.